With this now, while support for the Palestinians in South Africa is likely to increase as long as pictures of brutalized women and children continue to be broadcast on television screens. Now, this is according to Senior Research Fellow and Director of Afrasid, that's Thembisa Fakude. This as the conflict continues to cause divisions around the world. He joins us now. Very good afternoon to you, sir. Thank you for joining us. Just now, we're talking about the United Nations, how they've come together to try and find some sort of resolution to cease the fire in Gaza. That doesn't seem to be working at the moment, despite some of the resolutions that have been made. But bringing it back home, we have seen a reshaping of the political landscape in South Africa, if anything is to go by from, the comments that we've heard from different political parties, the DA, the Economic Freedom Fighters, and the ANC. What is your reaction to some of that shift that we have seen happening?
Well, I think it's expected because South Africa experienced something similar to what's happening in Israel during the times of apartheid. Having said that, of course, what's happening at the moment in Palestine is much more, particularly in Gaza, is much more harsher than what we experience as South Africans, particularly those of us who live in the township. There's a collective punishment that is taking place at the moment in Gaza. And so the shift within the main political parties in South Africa, the ANC and particularly the EFF, is driven by that feeling that we're seeing a repeat. This time around, we're seeing it live on television screens and, witnessing horrors every night for the past 20 days of Palestinians being bombarded and suffocated to death by the Israeli government.
And what would you say are some of the key factors that are shaping the views of the different political parties and the direction that they have taken in terms of either their affiliation or their support for either Palestinians or Israel in this case?
Well, as I've said, it's because of our past experiences, but it's just pure injustice. I mean, what we see at the moment on television screens is just very, very difficult to swallow. 20 days of continual bombardment, killing of women and children. The majority of those that have killed so far, the Palestinians are saying they've incurred over 7,000 deaths since this war started. Half of those are women and children. So it's very difficult to spin this, very difficult to explain it in any other way except that the majority of South Africans, including the political parties, are just driven by the sheer atrocity and horrendous pictures that we continue to see. So I think politics this time around, the social absence is just a human reaction that's been triggered by the horrors that we are currently witnessing on our television screen.
And the world geopolitics that we see happening, South Africa obviously has its own allies when it comes to their foreign policy. Do you think there needs to be a shift in how it's reacting to this war?
Well, South Africa must remain in its position, and its position hopefully is driven by justice, it's driven by equality. So it has to maintain that position. And I think what's happening at the moment, we see disappointingly countries such as Ethiopia siding with the Americans and Israelis. One would have thought that the Africans would have taken a much more stronger position, an AU position. But we see Africans also being divided in terms of their support. They're split in this war. You have some Africans who support the Israeli government or IDF, but you have the larger majority, at least of the world, supporting the Palestinians, judging by the voting that we see last night.
And I'm glad you mentioned the African Union, because now that's a broader aspect of it as we look at the continent and what role the continent has to play in wars such as these that are happening in the Middle East. But of course, as the continent, we're affected.
Yes, we are affected, and one would have expected. I mean, ordinarily, the AU tends to take a uniform position. Smaller nations tend to piggyback on the AU when it comes to foreign policy. But for the first time, well, not the first time, but we're seeing more and more Africans taking their own independent position outside the AU. And it started with when Israel was brought in through the back door to have an observer status within the African Union by the chairperson of the African Union Commission. And that has created this position where you find Africans split in terms of their support for Israel and their support for Palestinians. So AU is going to be weakened. And one of the countries that has since entered Africa in terms of polarizing the uniformed or unified stance of the African Union is Israel. Israel is beginning to play a very, not so constructive role in terms of the politics in Africa, coming in and dividing and ruling using money and other incentives. So this is becoming a problem. And I think African Union after this is going to come out wounded, and we are beginning to see, with Ethiopia also taking the lines, we are beginning to see the gradual deterioration of the African Union in terms of its policies on foreign affairs.
And just finally, Mr. Fakude, we saw renewed attacks on Gaza starting last night. These were airstrikes, and we're made to understand that there are ground attacks that are also imminent. Outside of everything that is happening to try and find a solution to end this war, how do you see this progressing?
Well, first of all, Israelis will be very foolhardy to be going to Gaza at the moment. One, because they are blind and deaf in terms of intelligence, because all the intelligence that they've had on Hamas was taken by the Hamas militants when they entered Israel. So at the moment, they don't have manpower, nor do they have the know-how in terms of what they'll do when they go to Gaza. Chances are, of course, if they do go to Gaza, they are likely to be killed en masse. And this is why it's taken them 20 days, notwithstanding that they've threatened from day one that they were going to go into Gaza. But they still haven't gone in terms of the ground force, because they understand the challenges that are associated with it. My only concern, of course, is that once we start having Hezbollah joining in this and Iran supporting the current conflict, then hell will break loose, and this is likely to spread throughout the world.
Mr. Fakude, thank you so much for your insights. We certainly appreciate it. Of course, this is a developing story as war is escalating in Gaza. We're keeping an eye on that story, and we'll continue to give you the latest updates as they happen.